It's not even February, and we are seeing one of the craziest stories in gaming, Palworld. I'm sure you've heard of it. Pokemon with guns, as people have taken to calling it. This is a game that has taken the world by a storm. Its sales figures are utterly insane, as is the discourse surrounding it. And what I'm here to do is basically give you a rundown of everything going on surrounding this game, starting with the Steam page here, where it shows that Palworld has a very positive review score of 93% from 46,491 user reviews as of the recording of this video. Now, where things get really crazy is if you look at its Steam charts data right now, and this could very well change and it could very well go up. As of the recording of this video, Palworld is the top game right now in the world on Steam, and its peak concurrent players is breaking all kinds of records. It is at 1.5 million peak concurrent players last time that number peaked. And that is a figure that places Palworld in third place when it comes to the most peak concurrent players on Steam ever, surpassing games like Dota 2, Lost Ark, and only behind Counter-Strike 2 and PUBG Battlegrounds. If we go to SteamDB, you can see that Palworld is at the top of pretty much every chart right now, most played games right now, trending games, hot releases, popular releases, 1.5 million concurrent players playing at the same time. That was like a couple hours ago before I recorded this. And you can see the meteoric rise of this game play out live in its first few hours and days of release. We're talking about six figures, and then that kept rising and rising. We got to 1,200,000 or almost 1,300,000, and now almost 1,600,000. That also means that Palworld has the second highest peak concurrent player count of any paid game, only behind PUBG's 3.2 million players. PUBG, recall, was a paid game before it went free to play. As for the progression of Palworld's sales figures, it sold 1 million units in 8 hours. It then sold 2 million in 24 hours. It sold 3 million in 40 hours. It sold 4 million in only 3 days. And in that same day, it sold 5 million units. And keep in mind that the game isn't really officially fully out yet. It is in early access, and you can definitely tell when you play the game. But the fact that it's doing numbers like these in early access, imagine the numbers it'll do when it's more feature complete and it is fully released, when it goes 1.0. That's assuming the game doesn't get into legal trouble, because there are some accusations of plagiarism and stuff that I'll get to in a bit. But right here, right now, the developers of Palworld are living the good life. Worth noting is that the budget of Palworld was roughly 1 billion yen, which translates to about $6,754,000 as of the current state of the dollar value. Well, suffice to say that the game has made its money back and then some at the discounted price point of $27. Multiply that by 5 million and you get $135 million that this game has made in revenue. It's already made over $130 million in profit. Not even the developers expected this kind of success, which is why servers have been overloaded to a degree that they did not foresee. And so there are server outages going on right now, which is to be expected for a game that's in early access from this development studio that was not expecting this kind of flood of players. As for how the game has been received, well, honestly, a lot of people seem to be having a good time with it. When it comes to what journalists or media outlets are saying, IGN is saying that this game is a surprising blast. Then you got Ars Technica here saying that it is something of a messy product right now, but it's compelling in its own right as well. Folks like Gene Park from the Washington Post say that does feel cheap and stupid, and yet there is something about this game that really gets you hooked. And then I've seen outlets with a negative impression of this game because of its display of animal cruelty, to which I'd say the game is pretty self-aware and is no more messed up than, say, something like Cult of the Lamb. Like, I don't know. If it's not your cup of tea, fair enough. But it knows what it is. It's not like encouraging that kind of behavior. It's just, it's a parody of Pokemon, essentially. As for what my impressions of the game are, well, let me put it this way. I was going to play like 2 to 3 hours of it just to get a basic idea of it before making this video. I ended up playing 6 hours. Time kind of flew by, and I actually did eventually get hooked to the game to a point where I was like, let's just do one more thing, one more task. and I ended up playing 3 more hours than I had originally intended to. The game is, while it's labeled as Pokemon with guns as a meme, it's actually more something like Ark or Rust with Pokemon in them. It is about that survival gameplay loop of establishing a base and slowly upgrading your technology, except in this game, you've got Pokemon-like entities called pals to help you in your tasks or to help you during combat when you're out there exploring. And it's got the allure of survival games. On top of that, you've got the intrigue of exploration that yields you finding fascinating new creatures that you can catch and tame, and you can do all kinds of things with them, from assigning them to tasks to using them as weapons if you upgrade your technology enough to equip them with the right things, or you can use them as mounts. And so there is this addictiveness that comes with a combination of these two elements that I think makes this brand of survival game pretty unique. It does take ideas and inspirations from other things, but in combination, it does create something that is kind of fresh feeling, if you ask me. And so I'm actually jiving with this game more than I expected, and like seeing my base progress and seeing all the different creatures that I get to catch and my interactions with them, and kind of discovering the game does still feel pretty janky and unpolished and still lacking in some areas. It just needs a little more substance, and it needs to be definitely much more fleshed out. But as an early access game, I feel like the foundation of this is extremely solid, and if they can keep executing and keep making content updates and fix some of the issues and really just polish it up and flesh it out, yeah, I can see this experience being something that tons and tons of people will enjoy. This is one of those early access games where you play it and you can see the promise of what this could become, because the early access on its own is already so addictive and something that might entice people who enjoy these kinds of genres. But only time will tell whether this developer can keep up with the popularity of this game and the ambition surrounding it and really make it something that feels full and fleshed out. The game's sense of humor is also something that seems to be catching a lot of people's attentions and is capturing headlines. Like, for example, turns out that you can catch not only pals or the Pokemon-esque monsters, you can also catch humans. And I've tried this myself in my session. You can, in fact, do that. And the game straight up tells you that in this world, doing so is considered inhumane, but you can do it anyway. It's up to you to play how you want. You can put them to work, or you can summon them to fight alongside you. You can also like butcher them for currency. Like it's quite something. You've also got pals like this one. The 69th deck entry is Lovander, a tall lizard-like pal with a desire to mate. They eventually moved on from pals and to humans, not making this up. So the game has a certain like charm and identity to it that I think some people are gravitating towards. Whether it's for everyone or not, that's another thing, but a lot of people seem to be finding the humor and the self-awareness in this game entertaining. Now, with all that said, it's not all sunshine and rainbows surrounding this game, because the discourse surrounding it has gotten pretty intense as people accuse the game of using AI and or plagiarizing Pokemon, like directly copying from that series. If you go to social media right now, you'll find plenty of threads highlighting how certain pals look pretty similar to certain Pokemon and seem to take direct elements from various Pokemon and combine them into one. And I'm not gonna lie, there were definitely a few instances where I was exploring Palworld and I saw a pal that I was like, wait, that reminds me of this Pokemon. And scrolling down, you can see more comparisons. Like this one, I did encounter this one. I was like, wait, I've definitely seen this Pokemon before. And then this one right here is, I mean, that's a pretty direct inspiration, if you will. And scrolling down, you'll find plenty more arguments to that effect. Here's another thread that kind of compares pals with Pokemon that seem to have been direct inspirations for them. I mean, this particular one right here, I mean, the faces are damn near identical from the proportions to just the exact design. But obviously, there are some elements that are very different as well. But yeah, as you scroll down through these, some might be better arguments than others, but there are clear inspirations here and there. Now, the argument of whether this is legally correct or not is one that has cropped up. Morally speaking, obviously, that's up to you to determine whether these inspirations are too direct or whether there are enough differentiations in the pals of Palworld to make these Pokemon-esque kind of entities unique enough for this particular IP. Here's one more thread for good measure that features this collage that compares and contrasts the pals versus the Pokemon. And it's up to you to determine which ones seem to take too much of an inspiration and which ones seem to be reaching. But there are definitely some similarities. From a legal standpoint, taking inspiration from another's design, even if that inspiration is very clear, doesn't tend to stand up in court. Whereas if you're directly copying or taking somebody else's work and just like changing it a little bit, like say if you were to literally take somebody else's asset and model and then adjust it, and then release that as if it were your own, that would maybe potentially stand up in court. I'll get to that in a bit, but before we get to that, I want to talk about the discourse surrounding artificial intelligence, because the game is not only being accused of plagiarizing certain designs, it's also being accused of potentially using generative AI tools. There are plenty of people on social media who are posting things like this. I feel sorry for devs right now in the industry who must be wondering what they're working so hard for when you see AI copy pasta trash like this selling more than games like Metroid Dread or Hollow Knight. Here's somebody else resenting Palworld, seeing this as the first step in the normalization of generative AI slop games, which is really depressing. But it is worth highlighting that as of right now, as of the current recording of this video, there is no proof or evidence that generative AI was used in the creation of Palworld. If that evidence crops up later, I'll be sure to talk about it. But right now, people are making this assumption because so many of the Pokemon or PAL designs look like Pokemon, but taking inspiration and or plagiarism can also be done by hand. So it's important to not just straight up put out there that this game likely uses AI when we don't really know for sure yet. And it's also worth noting that Steam requires that games disclose if AI was used in any way, shape, or form. And there's no disclosure surrounding that unless the developers are actively trying to hide that. In terms of the AI argument, that's one area where I'm like, so long as the evidence doesn't exist that AI was used, I don't see any point in talking about it or addressing that aspect. Some folks have even highlighted that Palworld was announced 3 years ago when AI was not anywhere near as prominent as it is now, and it still had many of those PAL or Pokemon-like designs that you see in the current game. And others have also put out the argument that AI right now is not at such an advanced state that it can just automatically generate 3D models like the ones you see in Palworld, as Ryan Broderick here posted through this screenshot where it says, I'm going to put this as clearly as I can. It would honestly take more effort to use generative AI to make 3D video game character designs than to just pay someone to make bad ones. Trust me, I've actually tried. Now, that's not to say that the developers of Pocket Pair, specifically the CEO, hasn't expressed interest in using AI or hasn't used AI already. One of their previous releases, AI Art Imposter, for example, has an AI image generator built into it that every player uses. And then beyond that, this Twitter user highlighted tweets by the CEO where they were talking about using AI to bypass copyright, generating fake mons with it, calling AI Art Imposter a real-time image generation game, and being excited for games powered by GPT-4. That's not evidence that Palworld uses AI, but it is clear that the CEO of Pocket Pair does have an invested interest in kind of keeping track of AI and using it on some level. And with the discourse right now surrounding AI and the fact that lines haven't been drawn surrounding it, there are not enough regulations for it where so much content can get stolen through AI, that's just not being perceived as a positive aspect of Pocket Pair and its CEO's antics. But currently the AI accusation stuff is more speculative. The stuff that's gaining more ground is the plagiarism aspect of things. And that's where some people have highlighted things like how Pocket Pair Palworld's developers are practically built on copying / plagiarizing currently popular games / tropes. And Palworld is not the first. From a quality standpoint, Pocket Pair has a history of leaving games in buggy, unfinished states, all while charging a fairly high price point, so on and so forth. And then there's discussions here about how the CEO has talked about using AI and has expressed interest. But on the topic of games that, imitate others, here's Tamur Hussein, who highlighted that one of the developers' previous releases was this basically like Hollow Knight look-alike. Here's another tweet from Tony Coffey retweeting a now deleted post that showed footage of a previously released game from the developers of Palworld that basically showed a very Zelda Breath of the Wild-like experience. And you know that moment in Breath of the Wild where Link walks out and goes up to that cliff and the camera pans out and shows the world? That pretty much exact sequence is in the game. It feels very much like this individual also addresses what some people are saying, that, well, Palworld highlights that Game Freak and Nintendo have not been doing a great job at modernizing Pokemon and giving people the Pokemon experience that they desire. The fact that Palworld is so popular is on some level maybe highlighting the fact that Pokemon fans are craving for something more than what they've been getting, something of higher quality, of higher ambition. And I think on some level there is some truth to that. But what this individual is highlighting is that you can both highlight the criticisms that Game Freak deserves while also highlighting that Palworld might be feeding off of other people's art. Both Game Freak and Pocket Pair can be called out at the same time and criticized at the same time for their antics and or shenanigans. But yeah, there are those who believe that the way Palworld copies from Pokemon is pretty blatant, and some are disheartened by how much people seem to be defending this while talking about standing with creatives, while others, like prominent developers such as Jinga Bakaba here, who is the studio / co-creative director at Arcane Leon, were kind of baffled by how much the discourse surrounding Palworld has escalated, defending Palworld by essentially saying that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Its parts definitely do take inspiration from other things, but when put together, it comes together as definitely one of the more unique survival games that does blend survival with monster collecting and taming, and how that creates enough of a unique experience. And he also highlights how there is no proof that AI has been used in the creation of Palworld. He calls out the fact that games like Cult of the Lamb, Slime Rancher all have that kind of like cruel humor of, you know, quote-unquote animal abuse, but they don't seem to be getting as much slack as Palworld, though Palworld is maybe a little more blatant about it, but at the same time, Palworld, you know, it's its own brand of humor, and again, it seems to be pretty self-aware of what it is. It is very much in many ways a parody, and so people are defending the fact that parodies should be allowed so long as the game was actually built from the ground up and didn't just literally steal assets from other games. But that is where this game might potentially get into trouble if it is discovered that they did directly just rip Pokemon's assets, because some people are discovering that that might potentially have happened because of how closely the models of Palworld align with the models of Pokemon. Now, if those accusations prove to be false and Palworld did not in fact directly rip content or assets from Pokemon, then according to lawyers who have weighed in, I don't think Pokemon / Nintendo would win a case in a court of law against Palworld, because the game itself is different enough. It appeals to a whole new different audience, a more mature audience. There are other games that have also done these kinds of monster collecting games whose designs have taken like visual inspiration from others, so on and so forth. And then Richard Hoeg, who is also a lawyer, weighed in saying that, I can't tell you what Nintendo will or won't do about Palworld. I can tell you, however, that they'd have a tough time winning on any infringement claim that isn't arguing a direct design copy. Even if a PAL looks similar to a Pokemon, if the design changes are enough, then they're going to be in the clear. They can just chalk that up as we took inspiration from it, but we didn't directly copy it. But the reason the direct copying argument is coming up is because some 3D modelers and artists have decided to compare and contrast PAL 3D models with Pokemon 3D models, and for certain ones, they've found that the way they align is so close that there's no way this could have happened by accident, and that it may potentially bring up the possibility that they did rip off, like directly take Pokemon models and just change the homework, if you will. So right here we have a tweet by Twitter user Eric Covington, who posted a bunch of videos by another Twitter user, Bio, who you'll find posting a bunch of clips showing that when you take PAL and Pokemon models and align them, they fit too perfectly. Like, yes, we got two wolf-like entities here that if you were to align, you know, on some level they'd be similar, but the fact that the polygons and the alignment is so damn near identical, like that is something people are saying that this might be something that Nintendo could potentially use in court if they decide to pursue this legally. So here's Exhibit A, for example. When this user slides the PAL into the Pokemon, it's almost like near one-to-one alignment minus those changes that they might have made to the design. Here's another exhibit right here where if you take the PAL and the Pokemon and fuse them together, the models look, I mean, damn near identical. They can blend in very well on a level that is a little too uncannily accurate. And if you go to Bio's Twitter page, you'll find more posts highlighting similarities that when you look at them side by side, I'll be honest with you, yeah, like I can see why people are bringing this up. This is a little too close to the original source material where it might not just be inspiration. It's not just like a similar looking Pokemon. We're talking about the exact same like polygons, the exact same curvatures, and the exact same like sculpture. And there are industry professionals who have weighed in on this. Video Games Chronicle reached out to people in the games industry who have done 3D modeling or who have done character art, and we got one senior character artist who told VGC anonymously that you cannot in any way accidentally get the same proportions on multiple models from another game without ripping the models, or at the very least, tracing them meticulously first. I would stand in court to testify as an expert on this, referring to the fact that certain PAL 3D models match the Pokemon models from like Scarlet and Violet like uncannily closely. He continues, to give you an idea of how impossible this is, sometimes we have to copy one mesh to another when we make sequels to games. For example, redrawing an NPC from one game to another. And even when we rework those old models, they only sometimes match this closely due to rigging changes that might need to happen. There have been times when dozens of artists are given the same concept art to create a 3D model, for example, during art tests for jobs. I've seen 30 artists try to make the same horse during the exact schematics. None were as close to each other as these Palworld models are to the Pokemon models. None. The silhouettes and proportions here are near perfect matches. And that's where, on the legal side of things might get murky if Nintendo takes a look at the situation and goes, oh, they might have actually just taken our assets and used it in their game, just adjusting a few things here and there. They might have used our work directly, not just like made a thing of theirs from scratch, looking at our work, but taken our actual work and implemented it in the game while adjusting just enough to make it look a little more distinct. There's another senior character artist in the games industry who weighed in, stating the wireframe meshes look different, so they're not the same models, but it's so close that they may have built over the top of the Pokemon models and made a few changes so they weren't exactly the same. And this is the particular point of the discourse where many are arguing, well, if this is really the truth of the matter, then it's hard to argue that this is just taking inspiration. We may very well be looking at a case of copying. Video Games Chronicle also reached out to an intellectual property and digital media lawyer to weigh in on the situation and how Nintendo might be able to pursue this if they were to decide to do so. And here's what he said. It's down to Nintendo to absolutely prove copying, not merely taking influence. It's got to be obvious copying. You look at one picture and you look at the other alongside it. And again, going back to those comparisons and looking at them side by side, the similarities are pretty significant there. The industry would have come to an end years ago if you weren't allowed to take influence. You can't have a monopoly on a certain style of artwork. It literally has to be copying. So the fact that Palworld looks kind of similarish to a Pokemon from an art style standpoint, that wouldn't stand in court. But models being taken directly from Pokemon, that could potentially. The Pokemon company will be looking for a smoking gun, and these 3D model videos could be gold dust for the lawyers because they're not just thematically similar. From what those videos show, it could be extremely compelling evidence of copying. If those are original Pokemon models shown in those videos, then Nintendo should be home and dry in terms of demonstrating copying. That should be a smoking gun. So we'll see how this whole situation develops. I'm no expert on any of these topics, so I'm just presenting the information to you guys for you to be able to make up your own mind. At the end of the day, only time will tell, and hopefully the proper authorities or the proper experts will investigate this and we can get the truth of the matter. If there's no AI use and if this really isn't a case of copying, then great. But if it is, then that should be scrutinized appropriately. Now, one thing that's unacceptable is the way people have been sending death threats to the developers of Palworld. Here is Takuro Mizobe, who's the CEO of Pocket Pair, the developers of Palworld. He recently tweeted, "Currently, we're receiving slanderous comments against our artists, and we're seeing tweets that appear to be death threats. I've received a variety of opinions regarding Palworld, but all productions related to Palworld are supervised by multiple people, including myself, and I am responsible for the production. I would appreciate it if you'd refrain from slandering the artists involved in Palworld." I think raising questions is always something we should do, but making direct confirmative accusations without evidence and sending death threats, that's where lines are crossed, and that's where discourse can turn ugly. But I think the questions raised surrounding Palworld and its development and the potential for plagiarism, given some of the evidence we've seen, are worth raising and worth either pursuing further to clear Palworld, or we have to hold them accountable. As much as people might be enjoying Palworld, if the methods of creating this game involve taking other people's work and stuff like that, that's clearly wrong. And as much as people might be loving the experience, it doesn't change the fact that that stuff has to be called out if that is, in fact, what ends up being the case. But for right now, nothing is fully definitive. There's some compelling evidence out there. But I want to wait and see how this all plays out before making any, like accusations and stuff like that. But I did want to put forth the information so you can at the very least get an idea and an overview for what's going on, what people are talking about, and what the Palworld situation is currently like. For me personally, it's the 3D model stuff and how closely they match to Pokemon models in particular that got me a little like, oh, there might actually be something here. But as someone who's not an expert in, character art and 3D modeling, I'm going to let the experts who Video Games Chronicle spoke to speak for themselves. They said what they said, and, what they said was pretty compelling. But again, time will tell whether we'll see Nintendo, look at this and agree with maybe these character artists and pursue legal action and deem this game to be too close to the source material or copying too much for it to be something that can stand on its own, and whether we'll see some kind of legal battle happen. But for now, this development studio is seeing incredible success on a level that nobody expected. This a kind of breakout success that comes every once in a blue moon, especially from a brand new IP. And yeah, we'll see if this all ultimately lasts, if the developers keep up with this game and really, allow it to realize its full potential, and whether it's legally in the clear enough for this to be allowed to continue in its current state. In the meantime, though, let me know in the comments below what your thoughts and opinions are on this whole situation, whether you think that there's wrongdoing on the side of the Palworld developers, or whether you think people are blowing this out of proportion based on the information that's out there, based on the evidence that's been presented, and based on what multiple outlets and multiple sources and developers have said when speaking about this. Share your thoughts in the comments below, and to be further updated on all things gaming news, reviews, and discussions, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out.